Good morning, everyone. We are continuing with our course that is BPSC 145 Democracy and Development in Northeast India. So, we are continuing this entire course, and today is the last lecture of this BPSC 145 that is all about Northeast India. So, today we are starting with Unit 14 that is Human Rights Movement. So, human rights movement in India is playing a very vital role because it shapes and reshapes the political system and also the political culture. So, this human rights movement is not only shaping and reshaping the system of politics but also the culture of politics that exists in India. So, over the years, we can see that these movements have widened the very contours of democracy and democratic temperament. So, being a democratic country, these human rights movements are very much playing their significant role in widening the contours of democracy. So, human rights movement have become prominent in the Indian political process since the 1970s. So, in the decade of 1970s, we can see that these human rights movement became very prominent and significant. So, human rights movement are a coalition of social movements. So, we have read about social movements in our previous sessions, previous lectures. So, these human rights movements are a coalition of social movements. It is concerned with diverse issues ranging from natural resource management, livelihood, multicultural identities, gender issues, and opposition to ethnic conflict. So, this human rights movement is all encompassing because it is concerned with the issues that are ranging from various aspects of a person's identity and their needs. Basically, this unit will deal with the nature and operational dimensions of human rights movement, basically in the Northeast India. So, let's talk about the notion of human rights. Human rights have become a popular term among social and political activist groups and in the discourse of democracy. So, this term, human rights, is very, very significant nowadays, and there are basically what is human rights, like which rights we can consider as human rights. It is natural rights of a person to which she or he is entitled as a human being. Being a human being, there are some kind of natural rights that exist with everyone. So these human rights are those rights which are natural rights of a person because they are human being. So, according to the United Nations Center for Human Rights, these are those inherent in human beings' nature. It is in human being nature to get those rights. So, it is very essential for the survival of people as human beings. So, these rights, without these rights, a person's survival is at danger. So, the state should not violate these rights. This is very important. Instead, the state is expected to protect and enhance human rights. So, state cannot violate someone's human rights because it is natural to them because they are human beings. But on the other hand, it is the state who is expected to protect those human rights. Human rights are a part of civil as well as democratic rights, and these rights have different philosophical roots. They have witnessed changes in different of social and political context. The evolution of human rights can be broadly grouped into three generations, and we will be learning about these three generations of human rights which are grouped together in our next slide. So, starting with the first generation of human rights that originated in the 18th century in Europe. So, the first generation of human rights emerged in Europe in the 18th century. The American and French revolutions formed the context and for the rise of the human rights of the first generation. So, why there is a emergence of human rights concept in the 18th century Europe? Because there was American and French revolutions that took place which ultimately led towards the emergence of the human rights. They aimed to provide liberty to the individual against arbitrary action of the state. So, what was the motive of these human rights? Why the demand was there for human rights? Because it ultimately wanted to provide liberty to the person, liberty to the citizen, and there should not be any kind of arbitrary action of the state against them just because they are human being and they are citizen of that particular country. So these rights protect civil and political rights regarding individual freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of thought and faith, etc. Now let's talk about the second generation of human rights. The second generation of human rights emerged in the 19th century. Do remember that the first generation of human rights emerged in 18th century in Europe. The second generation of human rights emerged in the 19th century. So around one century later, along with movements of the working classes on their political and economic issues. So here the issues was related to the working class and their political and economic issues. As the rights in this generation were related to social, cultural, and economic security, they were also security oriented issue. So this is very, very important to note down and differentiate between the first generation and the second generation. Please note it down that these rights of this second generation are related to social, cultural, and economic security, and that is why these issues are considered to be as security oriented issues. Now let's move on to the third generation. Third generation of human rights has emerged in the context of global interdependence. In India, the human rights movement mainly started to respond to the violation of human rights during the emergency. So, the third, as we learned in our previous slide, that the third generation it got emerged in the context of global interdependence, because now the globe, the countries in the entire world is interdependent, and there is a consensus that there should be human rights that should not be limited to a territorial boundary. Now let's move on to India. So in India, the human rights movement mainly started to respond to the violation of human rights during the emergency. So we all know that the emergency has been declared in the year 1975, which lasted to 1977. And during this emergency period, there were many cases where human rights were violated, and these movements, particularly the human rights movement, they started in response of those violations. So, initially, the focus of human rights movements in India was mainly on civil liberties. However, their scope became broader in due course to include other rights also, which is, for example, right to livelihood, right to environment, right to sustainable development, etc. So, the scope of these human rights movements broadened by the time. There is a scholar named as Ajay Gudavarti who observes that the first phase of the human rights movements of the 1970s was the civil liberty phase. So, according to Gudavarti, the first phase in Indian human rights movement, don't get confused. In the previous session, previous slide, we have talked about the human rights overall, and now we are particularly focusing on India. So, according to Gudavarti, he observed that the first phase that emerged in the 1970s, as we have read that it is during the emergency period, he considered and he observes that these human rights in the 1970s was the civil liberties phase. During the civil liberties phase in the 1970s, the human right movement worked the framework of state civil society complementarity. The human rights underlined the need to retain institutions, autonomy, and attempt to recover a right based civil society. So, in the right based civil society, all citizens can have access to fundamental rights. This was the important thing in which, in the first phase of human rights movement in India in the decade of 1970s, the focus was on easy access to fundamental rights to everyone in the sense all the citizens of India. Now, this was all about the first phase. The next phase that began in the 1980s was the democratic rights phase. So Gudavarti also says that in the second phase, it is democratic rights phase, which started in 1980s. During this phase, the human rights movement operate with a new framework, the state versus civil society framework. So what was this new framework? It was a contradiction. It is a There is a difference in the state which is against the civil society framework, and civil society which is against the state. So during this second phase, which started in 1980s, which is also known as democratic rights phase, This phase, the human rights movement constructed the notion of civil society as a pure realm of freedom which functioned outside the state. Such notion of civil society consisted of various militant and radical social movements. So this was something different from the first human right movements in India. Now let's talk about the third phase. In the third phase, which is also known as the human rights phase, started towards the end of the 1990s. So, do remember, do note down that the first phase of human rights movement in India started in 1970s, basically during the emergency period, because it was said that human rights have been violated during that time. Second phase, which is known as democratic rights phase, that started in 1980s, and now we are moving towards the third phase, which is known as human rights phase. It started in the end of the 1990s. So, what is different in this phase? So, in this phase, human rights redefined themselves in the framework of new civil society versus political society. Now, there is contradiction between whom it is the new civil society versus the political society. So, in its final and contemporary phase, the human rights movements strive to move beyond the political dimension and base themselves on an abstract moral dimension. So, there was a shift from political dimension, the focus shifted to the moral dimension. The human rights movement in India are the responsibility of social and economic inequalities and injustice from one group of people to the other. In this context, both the state and the non state actors violate human rights, and human rights movements generate democratic consciousness in society, and sometimes they impact the policies of the state. Now, let's focus more deeper by learning about the movements in the Northeast India. We started with an overall discussion of human rights, then we moved on to India, and now we are particularly talking about the Northeast India, which is our topic and which we are learning in this unit and this paper. So, the issue of human rights in Northeast India has the following dimensions. So, there are many dimensions of the human rights movement and human rights issues in Northeast India. Starting, the first point is the complaints of the people in Northeast, especially the indigenous groups, about violation of their human rights by the army. So, the first of all, the issue that arose in the Northeast India is about the complaints of the indigenous groups living in Northeast about their human right violation by the army, which is settled there, which is stationed there. Secondly, the human rights of the people of the displaced for construction of dams and environmental degradation. The second issue of human rights is about the displacement because of development. So basically, the displacement for construction of dams, environmental degradation, these are the reasons why people of Northeast displaced. And because of that, it is violating their human rights. Next is the right of the people injured and displaced in ethnic violence. So we have learned about the Northeastern India since day one that this part of our country is so diverse, it is full of so much ethnicities, there are so many different identities that live together. That is the reason why there is also high chances of ethnic violence among them, and because of that the rights of the people who are injured and displaced persons is also a concern for the issue of human rights. These issues are taken up in the social movements of various groups in Northeast. So these are the issues, human rights issues that exist in Northeast India. So among these, the issue of human rights violation by the security forces, especially in the areas affected by insurgencies, is the subject of discussion in the groups concerned with the human rights, academic circles, and the press. So, in this discourse, various factors are viewed as the reason for human right violation. We have learned the issues of human rights, and now we are learning about the reasons behind the violations of human rights. The first one is the outcome of autonomy movements, territorial conflicts, insurgency, regional movements, presence of paramilitary forces, etc. So there is the reason behind why the human rights are violated in the northeast part. So these are the reasons. It is a generally argued that the implementation of the Armed Forces Special Power Act, which is popularly known as AFSPA, is the principal cause of the violation of human rights in the insurgency affected areas. So there is a complaint that because of the implementation of the Armed Forces Special Power Act 1958, AFSPA 1958, it is the principal cause of human rights violation of the people living in the northeastern region. The AFSPA is applied to the areas which are declared disturbed by the central and the state government. So it is very, very important to note that where it is AFSPA implemented, it is not here in Delhi. Why it is there in a particular area? Because AFSPA is implemented in an area which is considered to be declared as disturbed, and this act provides for the deployment of the armed forces in the disturbed areas so that they can retain peace in the particular area which is considered as disturbed. So there is a demand for withdrawal of the AFSPA is one of the principal demands of human rights groups in the Northeast. So this is one of the major concern for the Northeastern people because they considered this AFSPA as the human rights violation, the reason behind it. States such as Assam, Manipur, Mizoram, and Nagaland have experienced human rights violation stemming from the conflict between the army and the insurgent. There is a continuous conflict that goes on between the army and insurgents in Northeast India, which brings anarchy and a situation which is very much disturbing. It has adversely impacted the life and the livelihood of the people, and also the people who are affected, who are living in those particular areas and who are affected by these insurgencies, are caught between insurgency and counter-insurgency operations. So this is something a very major concern that is there exist in Northeast. Scholars such as Udayo Mishra, Apurva Kumar Badua, Sanjeev Badua, and Manorama Sharma view the violation of human rights due to the central government's policy. So these thinkers considered the violation of human rights due to the central government's policies. It is marked by the neglect of the opinions and specific needs of the region. Now, let's move on to know more about human rights movement, particularly in the state Assam. In Assam, the question of human rights is related to the impact of activities which specifically the extremist group, also the usage of force by the paramilitary forces. There is also issues related to the human trafficking that is impacting the women and children of the area. There is also the effect of the border disputes. There is insurgency and counter-insurgency moves that also exist in Assam. So these are the issues that are concerned with the human rights violation that happened in Assam. So there are reports of abuses of human rights in Assam during the 1990s. So why are these issues arisen in 1990? And these included the arrest of human rights activists and journalists by police, and bombings, kidnappings, assassinations targeting dissidents of ULFA members and suspecting informers. So there are different organizations which have been raising the question of human rights violation in the state. And in this context, the role played by the Assam Mahila Samiti, now popularly known as Pradeshik Mahila Samiti, is very, very relevant. The Samiti led a movement against violence and discrimination against women, women's literacy, etc. Now, let's move on to Arunachal Pradesh. The human rights question in Arunachal Pradesh is associated with the deprivation of the indigenous communities. It is especially those living in the villages along the border between the Arunachal Pradesh and China, the protection of the biodiversity, and the displacement due to the construction of dam. So these are the issues which is violating the human rights of the people living in Arunachal Pradesh. These communities living along the international border areas are deprived of basic human needs such as proper roads, healthcare, food security, drinking water facilities, etc. The people in the states have been demanding protection and maintenance of their biodiversity because northeastern region is full of flora and fauna, and that is why it is very important to maintain the biodiversity there. Chakma refugees have been asking for granting citizenship in Arunachal Pradesh, and even as the indigenous communities in the state have opposed it. Now let's talk about Manipur. The main feature of the human rights movement in Manipur is related to the insurgency. That is the major cause of violation of human rights in Manipur. It is arising out of the demand for autonomy of the state and the revocation of the Armed Forces Special Power Act AFSPA, as we have already talked about. In Manipur, there has been general resentment against the merger of the princely state with the Union of India in 1949. So the issue that is very alarming and that is concerning Manipur is not something new. It started with the time when India got independence, and Manipur there is a resentment among the general population because they didn't wanted their princely state to be merged with the Union of India. There is a feeling that exists among the people in Manipur that the merger of a princely state with the Union of India is illegal and unconstitutional, so they couldn't accept that yet. There has been a demand in the state that the state should have a greater autonomy. A large number of underground insurgent groups have been active in demanding autonomy in Manipur, and the central and the state governments also responded to the activities of the insurgent groups with the implementation of the AFSPA in the state. This has resulted in violence. The people in the state allege that the armed forces have been involved in violating human rights, which includes killing, misbehaving with the women. These are the issues that they are raising. There has been a demand for the revocation of the from Manipur. In the year 2004, 12 women protested standing nude against AFSPA. Meera Paibi, a women's organization, plays an important role in the women's movement in Manipur. This organization plays a role in a protest against the AFSPA. Iram Sharmila began fasting in the November 2000 against the gunning down of 10 persons by the Assam Rifles, to which she was a witness. She demanded revocation of the AFSPA from the state. She was arrested several times under Section 309 of the Indian Penal Code for a suicide attempt. Now let's talk about Meghalaya. In Meghalaya, the principal issues of human rights are related to deprivation of basic needs. So, in Meghalaya, the concern is education, medical facilities, poverty, especially in the remote villages. There is also human rights violation due to the mining of coal, uranium, environmental degradation, and deforestation, along with human trafficking. So, human rights violation by uranium mining by the Uranium Corporation India Limited (UCIL). It is at Domia Siat in West Khasi Hill district of Meghalaya, which posed a very health hazards to people's health. The mining of uranium was halted due to the protest by civil society organizations in the Meghalaya. Now, let's talk about Nagaland. There have been complaints of human rights violation in Nagaland by different human rights activists and organizations. Like in Manipur, in Nagaland also the question of human rights is related to the issue of political autonomies of the Nagas. So, Nagas wanted political autonomy, and that is the reason of the issues that is roaming around the human rights violation. The aspiration in Nagaland for getting political autonomy led to the emergence of insurgency in the Naga Hills. The government's counter-insurgency move led to the imposition of the Disturbed Areas Act 1956 and the AFSPA in the 1958. Under the provisions of the ASPA, the army used forces resulting in the arrest and killing of insurgents and others, and for restoration of peace became a very essential part of protecting the human rights of the people. Now let's talk about Tripura. Human rights issues in Tripura are largely related to basic human needs such as health, education, means of transportation, employment, and disturbance and violence in the ethnic conflict and insurgency. According to Tripura Human Development Report 2007, State of Tripura experienced significant progress in the social, economic, and political indicators of human development. However, Shortcomings in economic structure, there is transportation, communication system, public health system, etc., continue to exist. So, uh, you know, uh, uh, being showing a significant progress in other aspects, but there also exist shortcomings in other parts. So, human rights activists also express their grievances against the public health system at different periods, especially during an emergency. So, there is a concern related to public health system in Tripura, which is causing problems in the state and which is becoming a very major issue for the human rights activists. Those are active in Tripura. Now, let's talk about Mizoram. There has been a general complaint in Mizoram that their state did not receive proper attention from the central government and the Assam government, of which Mizoram was a part earlier. So, the first example was the Motam famine of 1959. The Mizos felt that both the central government and the state government of Assam, of which Mizo Hills were then part, neglected them during the famine. This led to the emergence of a 2 decade long insurgency led by the Mizo National Front under the leadership of Lal Denga. We have learnt about Lal Denga in our previous lectures. The use of violence by the insurgents and counter violence by the security forces impacted human rights. It also includes people's lives and livelihood, their freedom, and their security. With this, we are finished with Unit 14 about human rights movement. Now we are moving towards Unit 15, social and human development. Social and human development, the concepts. Let's understand the concepts. Development is a broad phenomena. It involves the following aspects, which each of which perhaps has its specific scope and theories. It can be categorized in following ways, and we will be learning about each category in detail. The transition in the form of economic and social system, example from agriculture to industry or other sectors, the transition mode of production or phase in the progress of history through measures like land reform, such as the disintegration of the traditional, agrarian, and the social system, etc. Second category is about the development as welfareism. For example, development through the welfare schemes for the poverty alleviation, affirmative action for the welfare of the marginalized communities such as SCs, STs, OBCs, and now EWS. EWS stands for economically weaker sections. There is also women. There is also special provisions for the backward regions such as the Northeast India. Thirdly, sectoral infrastructural development that consists of roads such as expressways and highways, industrial development, which comprises of industrialization, and special economic zone, which is in short form known as SEZ, cluster-based industrialization, educational institutions and health system, etc. Let's see the background of this study of this chapter. Why social human development is important for us to read. So, social and human development is related to the tertiary sector of the economy. The other sectors are agriculture and industry. In Northeast India, the tertiary sector accommodates salaried population in banking, insurance, transport, communication, public administration, and other services such as health, education, sanitation, etc. Other sectors of the economy, such as industry and agriculture in the Northeast, plays a less effective role than the tertiary sector. The predominance of the tertiary sector underlines the role of education and health, the indicators of social and human development. This sector employs human resources available in the region as well as migrants from other regions of the country. Despite the predominance of the tertiary sector, the region lacks adequate avenues for employing a large section of the population. So, in Northeast, there is a predominance of the tertiary sector, but the region lacks adequate avenues for employment. This led to the migration of the indigenous communities from the region to the other parts of the country, and out migration from the Northeast was significant until the 1990s. It became a trend in the post reform period. Many of the out migrants from the Northeast to the other regions are educated. It implies two things. One, improvement in social development in terms of getting an education. Secondly, lack of economic opportunities to accommodate the educated youth. Now, let's focus on education. This sector employs human resources available in the region as well as migrants from other regions of the country. So education sector employs not only the people who belong to the particular region, but also the migrants who came from other parts of the country. Despite the predominance of the tertiary sector, the region lacks adequate avenues for employing a large section of the people. This has led to the migration of the indigenous communities from the region to other parts of the country. Out migration from the northeast was insignificant until 1990s. It became a trend in the post reform period. So this is how education is important. Now let's move on to the health part, health sector. According to the NFHS 4 data that came in the year 2015 and 2016, the states in the northeast have achieved a 50% immunization rate of children. So this is so despite the fact that the region has poor infrastructure and difficult geographical terrain. The region inherited disease such as diarrhea, malaria, tuberculosis, etc. from the colonial period. So these diseases are inherited from the colonial period. And when the country became independent, Northeast India had negligible health facilities. So there are very lack of health facilities in Northeast India. The delivery of the health system is affected by whether the population is concentrated or scattered in an area and the availability of the doctors. The areas which have a smaller population to be covered by a health center get better health services and facilities. Arunachal Pradesh and Meghalaya have a high infant mortality rate and crude death rate. So, this is very important to note down the differences in the regions from sector to sector. In Arunachal Pradesh, a single doctor serves a larger population than in Meghalaya. This is a very important thing to understand that how in Arunachal Pradesh there is only one doctor who serves a larger population than in Meghalaya. So, Arunachal Pradesh has scattered human settlements. It makes the delivery of the health services difficult for the people. So, geographical barriers also, also became the reason why health facilities are not able to be provided on time, because the human settlements in Arunachal is very scattered because of geographical location and because of the living habits of the people from that place, because of land, because of rivers, and there are many geographical barriers which exist in a place which is rich of flora and fauna. The scattered human settlement in Arunachal Pradesh and the lack of doctors in Meghalaya are the causes of a high IMR and CDR. Manipur, Mizoram, Nagaland, and Sikkim have a low IMR. IMR is infant mortality rate. So the lower population served by the doctors in Nagaland and Sikkim results in low IMR. In Nagaland, especially high female literacy rate along with a high number of doctors may be counted for low IMR. The infant mortality rate in Assam is the highest among the states in Northeast India, and it is above the national average. The principal reason for high IMR in Assam is linked to high risk in post neonatal childcare practices. So, with this, we end with our Unit 15 about the social and human development. Now, let's move on to Unit 16, which talks about economic development. This Unit 16 is the last chapter of this course, and with this, we will be finishing this entire course on Northeast. And let's move on to Unit 16. All states in the Northeast are endowed with natural resources, that is forest and minerals. So these Northeast India, as we already talked about, is rich of with flora and fauna, and along with that, it also has natural resources like forest and minerals. The utilization of the natural resources in terms of development of various sectors of the economy, agriculture, industry, and manufacturing indicates the nature of development in the states of the Northeast India. The tertiary sector dominates other sectors, that is agriculture, industry, and manufacturing, that we have learned in our previous chapter. There are also variations in developments of various sectors within and between the states of the region. So it is not uniform in all the 8 states of the Northeast region. It has variations. So studies shows that there are different levels of development across the state of the Northeast only in terms of industrialization, utilization of natural resources, and infrastructure development. So we are learning about Northeast as a region, but there is differences in their developments, the level of developments from state to state. The plain areas or valleys are more developed than the hills. So this is very important thing you should note, that the plain areas or valleys of a state from the Northeast region are more developed than the hills. Jhum cultivation is the principal mode of agriculture in the tribal dominated hill areas. The development of the states in the Northeast India has always been associated with the central government's policies. So during the colonial period, the policies toward the region were influenced by their administrative convenience and revenue needs. They introduced plantation economy and isolationist policies and made some areas excluded and partially included in the region. In the post independence period, special provisions were introduced in the constitution so that they can protect the natural resources and the social and cultural identities of the indigenous people in the region. Regarding the central government's attitude about the development of the Northeast, there are two opposing arguments in the academic discourse. One set of argument underlines that a lot of funds has been allocated to the development of the region. However, because of corruption, it does not reach to the targeted groups. Again, due to the disturbed law and order problems, the funds are not adequately utilized. The policies of the center towards the development of Northeast have been shaped in cultural approach. In this approach, economic development has been viewed in association with the cultural identities of the tribes in the region. Due to this approach, the role of bureaucratic arrangement in economy has been ever emphasized. Now let's talk about the phases of development. We can divide the evolution of economic development in the Northeast into 3 phases. So what are these 3 phases? The first is roughly from 1950s till 1972. Second comes the 1972 till 1990s. And then the post-liberalization phase that came in the decade of the 1990s. In the first phase, one was dominated by the Nehruvian model of development followed after the independence. In this phase, in the first phase, which started from 1950 till 1972, the state was given a dominant role in carrying out the development under the premises that the market would increase inequalities. So there was the Nehruvian model that have been established, and it is through this Nehruvian model of development it was followed in the Northeast after independence. In this model, the state was expected to reduce the inequalities. With reference to the Northeast India, however, development was not the main focus of the policies about the Northeast. The center's policy were oriented towards nation building, dealing with insurgencies, the question of political autonomies, resulting in the reorganization of Assam. So these were the concern of the center's policy during the first phase of economic development, which was dominated by the Nehruvian model of development. Secondly, the second phase was characterized by reorganization of Assam, the formation of states of Meghalaya, Tripura, and Manipur. For union territories of Arunachal Pradesh and Mizoram, which became states in 1987, and merger of Sikkim in 1975, and the creation of Northeastern Council in the year 1972. During this period, development became a focus of state policies and academic discourse. The third phase of economic reforms or post-liberalization phase, the center sought to give more institutional and policy incentives for the development of the Northeast India. Let's talk about the sectoral development. The state of Northeast India lagged behind the national level development, which we have already discussed since our first lecture. The gap between the regional and the national growth rates has widened in the post liberalization phase. So, according to Gulshan Sachdeva's calculation, the average growth rate in the 1980s and 1990s was 4.4 in the 1980s as against 3.6 in the 1990s. So, there is constant 1993 1994 prices. It was lower than the national average in both decades, 5.5 in the 1980s and 5.8 in the 1990s. The decline in the growth rate varied in different states, Assam with the lowest growth and Tripura and Nagaland with the highest growth rate. Skewed avenues for employment and rising aspirations have become perennial features of the economy in the Northeast. So, this section discusses industrialization, agricultural development, and urbanization with some examples from the Northeast. The second AGP in Assam began with bad economic conditions in the state. The state's per capita income was lower than many states in India, and it introduces policy for the development of industry, infrastructure, and agriculture. Now let's talk about agriculture. The growth of agriculture in Assam has been very low. The pattern of land distribution is one of the reasons for that, and one of the reasons for the low productivity in agriculture, particularly in Assam. So between the 1980s and 1990s, agriculture grew at the rate of 2.1% and it slowed down to 1.6% in the 1990s. So there is a decline. So from which source I am giving this data? It is the Assam Human Development Report 2003. The AGP did not adequately emphasize the importance of agriculture in its manifesto in 1996 elections. So here AGP stands for Assam Gan Parishad. It's a political party. We have read about it, and adequately they didn't emphasizes on the importance of the agriculture in their political manifesto, election manifesto. So, however, the Assam Gan Parishad government included it in its 2025 vision document. The vision document proposed a strategy of direct intervention for poverty alleviation and minimize unemployment. So, it was to be done through development of human resources. Now, Mizoram and Manipur. The inflow of cash from central agencies without a parallel mechanism for its absorption has created pathologies in Mizoram. A lot of funds have been allotted in the central pool of lapsable resources alone for the development of the Northeast region. A few rich have grasped a large proportion of money spent on luxury items. So the NSDP of Mizoram has been consistently lower than the national average, and development projects have failed to meet their objectives in Manipur. All development projects that have been stalled due to the interference of the militants. So there is also a issue of militancy. The militants demanded a certain amount of funds needed for the development, and there is construction of flyover in Emphal which was delayed because of such demand, which is posed by the militants. So the militant groups demanded money from the small traders. They demand money from barbers, low-ranking government officers. So this militancy issue is very disturbing in this region, and the absence of formally recorded rights in the land has acted as a barrier to investment in productive enterprises. Politicians, senior bureaucrats, and militants appropriate the funds meant for the public good. So, a large amount of subsidized fertilizers for farmers was diversified into the private market. Urbanization. Urbanization is also one of the parameters of development in Northeast India. Northeast, which is a predominantly rural society, is undergoing the process of urbanization. So, urbanization has become part of the agenda for the following reasons. So, let's see what are these following reasons. The first is the encouragement of the state government to promote development through a partnership between the state and the private entrepreneurs in the post reform period. Secondly, there is a rise of new social classes. And who are these new social classes? They are entrepreneurs among the local tribal communities. So, this is very significant and very important that we should understand there is an emergence of a new social class that consists of tribal communities, people who are now becoming entrepreneurs. So there is also literature on urbanization in Meghalaya, which is an example of urbanization in Northeast India. The Meghalaya government initiated a plan to develop new Shillong township coinciding with India's beginning of economic reforms. So now let's sum up our entire course in next few minutes. So there are 8 states in Northeast India are endowed with natural resources. So in all these 16 chapters that we have covered over so many lectures previously, now we are concluding with our this entire course on Northeast, and it is a definite thing that we have learned so many new things about Northeast, because Northeastern region was a very untouched part of our country, because very few people know in detail about Northeast. So this course helped us understand what is there in our such an important part of our country, which is not only considered to be a region with so many states, but it also shares border with so many countries. So this region is strategically very important region, and that is the reason why it is important to understand and learn about this northeastern region in detail, which we have done in last in knowing and in learning last 16 chapters, which properly focuses on not only the political aspect but also economic aspect, the indigenous communities that is there, the ethnic composition of the entire northeast region, and what are the differences among states. It is always considered that northeast is just a uniform, like the language is same and all, but we have learned that there are so many diversity and so many variations in the language, in the food, in the culture, in the practices, and in the traditions. So now let us sum up this entire course in few minutes. So as we have learned, there are 8 states in Northeast India which are endowed with natural resources. There is economic development which can be viewed in the terms of development of sectors such as agriculture, industries, service, infrastructure, and preservation of the environment. So, due to topography and geography, the economic development of Northeast India lags behind several other regions of the country. So, the process of development of the region, as we have learned, can be more understanding will be when we will learn it in 3 phases that we have already discussed. So in all these phases, the role of center towards the development of the region is very important. So regarding the role of the center of the Indian state, there are two kinds of contrary arguments in the academic circles. So one argument suggests that the center has neglected the opinion of the people of the Northeast in the formulation of its policies, including those relating to the development of the region. So this is one argument which is, very popular in the academic circles. The second argument is about, and which suggests that a lot of funds have been allotted by the center for the region's development. So these are the arguments, contrary arguments that is there in academic circles. But these have not been adequately spent due to the corruption. So the another argument which talks about that there are many funds that has been allotted by the center to the region's development. It's not been adequately spent just because of corruption and the link between the politicians and the bureaucrats that are there settled in the region. The first phase of Indian politics was marked by the dominance of the Congress party and the Nehruvian model of development. And in this phase, the center's policies towards Northeast India were also impacted by the concerns of the development of the nation state, insurgency, and autonomy movements. Then comes the second phase, which is marked by the reorganization of Assam, and NEC, that is Northeast Council, was created to work as an agency for the development of the region. It is a special category entitled the states in the Northeast for special grant and tax rebate from the center. The third phase began with the introduction of economic reforms in India. Moreover, this impacted the policy orientation about the Northeast. This phase was had some important features as follows, which is development became an important agenda. The regional governments got relative autonomy from the center to devise policies. There is private sectors, entrepreneurs, business persons were encouraged to play a role, And these are the things that is going on in Assam, not only in Assam but also the all the eight states in the northeast region. So with this I end my lecture here. Thank you.